Hey guys, welcome to the gun shop, and we've got Nick Horten back today, 6 months after the original steel shot test on this little Spanish beauty. Subsequent, you've gone out and shot it.
Indeed I have. I've put some 250 steel cartridges through it. The cartridges themselves have been either 50 of the 36 gram Ely 3-inch cartridge in either number 3s or number 1s, or 200 of the 28 gram number 5 shot VIP steel. The VIP steel is a standard velocity steel cartridge which you would have been able to shoot through this gun without any issues, and the 3-inch lightning steel is a high performance cartridge which, as we said right back at the beginning, is not recommended to be shot through this gun.
Says right on top of the box to be used only in steel shot-proof guns.
Indeed it does.
And I shall take this moment to say that from a personal, professional standpoint, as well as the gun shop does not endorse or recommend putting steel shot through guns that are not steel-proofed, period, regardless of what this test shows.
Absolutely. And again, just to sort of contextualise it, it's really if you like, a yardstick for that concept, and we'll see as we examine the gun whether generically the steel shot has had any deleterious effect on the gun. So when we come to that part, it's going to be interesting.
Right. So you had some good shooting with it, I take it.
This wildfowling season was not a classic one, I'm afraid. I fired a handful of cartridges on the foreshore, but most of the 250 cartridges, the 200 of the VIP steel was at pigeons, and the vast majority of the 53-inch was also at pigeons, but pigeon flighting, and roost shooting rather than decoying.
How'd you get on with the gun?
Very well. I like a side-by-side. The little bit of extra length on the stock of this one kind of brings it up to the 15.25 inches that suits me quite nicely. It's got sufficient weight to it to absorb some of the punishment from the 3-inch cartridges. Bearing in mind that this gun had what in lead terms would have been a superior proof, which would have rendered it usable for 3-inch lead cartridges up to 1 7/8 of an ounce. That's just shy of 2 ounces. And in fact, I was given a box the other day of some old Canadian Imperial 3-inch cartridges, which would have been within the lead proof parameters for this gun, and I fired them through it out of idle curiosity. And because it's not a hugely heavy gun, you knew that you'd fired them, and much the same with these 3-inch cartridges. Nothing to do with the cartridge, everything to do with the ratio of load to weight of gun.
Well, so far we're looking pretty good. The only discrepancy is half of a bloody foul in the right-hand barrel, but that's more than likely more my measuring in the original than here. It's neither here nor there, that kind of half a thou mark that I can see anyway. More than likely just cheap gauges. Everything else seems to marry up, I suppose. Did you pattern test it at all before?
I haven't done, no. I thought perhaps we might have a go at a pattern plate a little bit later, just to see what patterns it throws. I mean, the cartridges, the 28 gram cartridge, they work very well on pigeons. As we've said before, the ballistics of steel being what it is, it pays to confine your ranges, to within the sensible margin. For those of you who are used to using lead cartridges and tight chokes and shooting 50-yard pigeons with a light cartridge, you might do that with the heavier stuff, but you might want to keep it round about the 40-yard mark.
Fab Arm, all their barrels are ultra proof now, aren't they? So you can put steel for a full choke with them. And
Indeed.
they reckon that it will be very much the same as lead.
As lead, yes.
Apparently.
Oh,
apparently.
absolutely. And again, one of the facets of this that I'm keen to explore, but which relates more to the purist wildfowling market, in as much as we're talking about modern 3.5-inch chambered semi-automatics. There's a whole slew of aftermarket chokes available for those guns, which are made of a particularly tough steel, and they go right the way through the choke gradings, certainly up to full, and in some cases up to super full choke, and they are made and intended to be used with steel shot, and big steel shot at that.
You just use standard chokes in your Benelli, I take it?
Yes, thus far I've not felt the need to go down the aftermarket choke route. I'm still open to persuasion in that respect, and I would hope that certainly in time for next season that we might be able to take a look at that. But I've always been happy with the patterns thrown by the factory chokes, taking on board the steel-proof or the steel cartridge regulations that suggest that if you're using either a standard cartridge, in which case you should not go above the number 3 shot, or if you're using the high velocity cartridge, then under those circumstances you shouldn't go above half choke. I think I've got that right.
Sounds about right.
Yes, and that was probably watching you do that was going to be one of my questions. I can't detect any movement in it.
No. Still fairly sound. As I said, I don't think the power in a steel shot is going to be any more life-changing on the joint than a lead, is it? It's no more recoil or anything.
No, and indeed, I mean, certainly the mass of lead that you're punting out, which, as I say, might have been as much as almost 2 ounces of shot. Basic Newtonian physics suggests that there's probably going to be a little bit more recoil, and muzzle flip, and therefore
in a gun that weighs what, 7.5?
Yeah, it's not heavy.
All right. So if you want to come in close, we'll have a quick look over our results that are not that exciting, and the results of our visual inspection as well. So we have for you some fairly unexciting results, and providing that Nick actually keeps his gun for another season, which is possible.
Oh yes.
We'll do this again in a year's time.
Yeah.
Left versus right, before and after, are identical. Left versus right, before and after, are not quite identical. But I think that 0.5 there in the right-hand chamber might be a gauge thing. You know, it wasn't a full half, but then, to be fair, 6 months ago, I maybe should have had a decimal point on this as well. Who knows? That half doesn't scare me because the wall thicknesses remained the same in the right-hand barrel. We did have a loss of a half there. However, again, it wasn't quite a half, and maybe I was unsure there. But we've got these results, so we can look next time. If they keep decreasing, then it won't just be an anomaly. And the chokes remained the same. Joint was solid. Everything else was fairly solid until I did a visual inspection of the choke barrel, that being the left-hander. And it's going to be almost impossible to show you on film, but we do have, just at the muzzle here, just at the choke, one medium-sized rivel and 2 smaller ones, one at the beginning of the choke, one at the end, and the larger one just at the ramping point of the choke. None of them are that. You have to be staring. You have to get the light on it just so to see it.
Yes, but you can see them.
You can see them.
Yes, I mean, I've had a look, and they're definitely there.
See, I don't know your thoughts on this, Nick, but to me, this is a multitude of factors. Firstly, putting steel through a non-steel proof gun, the steel in the barrels isn't going to be quite as high quality or hard as a steel proof gun needs to be. No,
and indeed, just to reinforce that, the chap who took the chokes out of it, bearing in mind he only had he did another 2 guns for me, 2 AYAs and that Ugata chair, and the first thing he said to me was, you can tell the difference in the hardness of the steel between the AYAs and the Ugata chair. Just from how easy it was cutting. He said the Ugata chair is much softer in terms of the metal hardness. But it's a fair gun to test it with. You don't want to test it on something that's hard enough, do you? You want to test it on something average. And certainly from my point of view, it's been an opportunity just to sort of put down a few markers, in the sense that there's been an awful lot of nonsense talked and written about steel shot. One of them being that it will destroy your barrels in terms of scoring, etc. Well, okay, it's had some effect on the barrels, but it's the kind of ring bulging,
Pressure.
Pressure bulging, which the Americans have identified as being an issue, particularly with side-by-side guns since day one with steel. But the idea persists that if you fire a steel cartridge, any steel cartridge, that the gun's going to blow up. And I think thus far,
In a pinch, you'd happily do it in a pinch.
yes, and I think it's kind of dispelled that myth. But because this is, we are doing this and being utterly and completely honest about it, there has been an effect on the barrels, as you've just described, and I'm intrigued by that.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's only on the choke barrel as well. Perhaps there's something to be said that if you're gonna take a gun like this and put steel through it, not that we recommend that you do,
No.
but maybe stick more towards the hard quarter rather than the light half edge of it, potentially.
Yeah, and it might even have been because I as we discussed earlier, thinking back on it, one of the things that I did almost unconsciously was to put the number 1s in the left, i.e. the tighter choked barrels, and the number 3s in the right. And I do wonder whether it's a size thing, and that is an example of, come on brain, what's the term with steel shot, bridging, where the size of the pellets means that as they approach the choke they interlock, and being steel they can't deform like they would if they were lead, and it's that causes
smaller ones. There's more gaps for them to fit in.
It causes the ring bulge. So perhaps one of the things that you might learn from this is that if you do what Johnny and the gun trade recommends that you don't, you might want to consider perhaps number 3 shot might be an appropriate stopping point to avoid riveling your choke barrel.
What choke was the left beforehand? It was a full. I'm just going to measure it and see where you've had it taken out, whether it's still got that initial taper and whether it's flattened, whether they've just taken off that, because it might be not the fact that it's an 18 thou choke, you've got the harsh taper. Look.
Okay.
Right, so what I've done is I've got my tool here and I put a little bit of electrical tape around it just to mark where the choke begins, and as I drag it out, as soon as the taper stops, I'll put another marker on, and then I'll put a final marker on at the end of the choke. And we'll get an idea for either it's a true taper or anything. So we'll pull out all the way to 18. So what we got there is we've got the mark of the start of the choke, the mark of the 18th thou part, and then obviously our measuring apparatus there. So it's only essentially what he's done, which is no bad thing by the traditional removal of choke method. He's literally just bore out a straight line of where it would be tapered. So it might be the fact that we've got the harsh taper of
the remains of
a full
beginnings
choke.
of
So
the
we've
full
got a
choke.
really, if you like, we've got really steep and then cut, as opposed to a nice smooth taper.
Yeah.
However, they're a hell of a long choke. It's quite nice actually, isn't it,
Yeah.
to see? And they are almost identical choke start point as well. They're a good quality set of barrels.
Yeah.
However soft.
Yes, as you say, they're great quality, but made of butter.
Guys, we're going to go and shoot this and actually see what it's been doing this whole time. Mostly for us to show you that we have been shooting steel through it. You've
Indeed.
been shooting through steel through it. Not that we endorse it. And secondly, to see how our taper flat chokes perform. Because it'd be very interesting.
Indeed.
Don't anyone want to find out?
Let's go do it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just to fire a couple of Ely 36 gram number 3 steel shot at the pattern plate, and let's see what it looks like.
What are you expecting?
I don't know. We're about to see if it shoots high.
Or, in fact, in the right place whatsoever.
Being a side by side.
Right. So we have choke barrel, I presume, and unchoked barrel.
Indeed. That was the left barrel, the one that's nominally half choke with a 3-inch number 3. I've managed to put the pattern slightly to the right of the centre.
Sure that's you?
I think it's probably aiming error on my part.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a fairly decent pattern, quite tight. It's not perfectly round or anything, but it's a killing pattern, that's for sure. At 30 yards.
Indeed. I'm just, well, what I will do next is have a look at the other one and see how that compares. My mind is going back to what you said previously about how the choke has been bored, and I'm just wondering, can I see anything there that might suggest that there was an issue with that?
It is very tight for a half choke. I mean, not that I've got a huge amount of experience with patterning steel cartridges. If it was lead, I'd say that was an extremely tight pattern for a half choke at 30 yards. That was, given that realistically the majority of it is put over 2 square foot. It's not a great pattern, but it's a very tight pattern. So
yes, and I have done some patterning with these cartridges in the past, and normally the cartridges would throw nice even patterns. I mean, one of the upsides of steel is that generally speaking it patterns certainly more densely than lead because you haven't got any of the flyers, and I do wonder whether what impact the gun has had, or the gun's choke profile has had on that.
I must admit, I always fancied doing a series of starting with a gun, bore the choke out in various ways. So take it, flat it, so you've got that like you've got a ramp and a flat.
Yeah.
Do a true taper. Take it so you've only got, I don't know, a centimetre of choke at the end, a very tight constriction. Just see what all these things do, because obviously they did all this when they were developing chokes.
Indeed.
But we can't go and see that now.
No.
Or you can't see it on YouTube, so we can't see that now.
No. Let's take a look at the other one. That's the
11th hour barrel.
Yeah, that's the quarter choke.
And what was the quarter choke originally?
The quarter choke was originally
just a half, I expect.
Actually, I think it might have been full and full. I think
Really?
I think it was full and 3/4 originally. But the quarter choke is
very nice,
showing quite a reasonable pattern.
You flip it over there.
Well, there you go, and there, you see it better there.
You see a really nice spread. There's a little gap there, but it's a very nice round spread.
Yes, and that one I managed to put the pattern probably slightly nearer the centre of the plate, which yeah, kind of begs the question: what would be the effect of just tidying up the choke in this left barrel a bit?
Can't be too well. It'd be interesting. It would be interesting to find out.
Yes.
I think a lot of it might take the riveling out, might decrease your pressure quite significantly.
Yeah.
But in reality, it throws a killing pattern.
Yes. Yeah. Of course, one of the answers would be to fire some more cartridges at a pattern plate, just to see whether that was an aberration.
Well, this is it.
Perhaps that's
unfortunately, these are literally my last 2 pattern plates.
Indeed, yeah. Perhaps that's a job for another day.
It wouldn't be a bad one. There's always the thing with patterning though, is you need to fire 10 shots through each barrel with a certain cartridge to actually build any average whatsoever.
Yes.
However, at the same time, for pigeon fly over, you're not going to have 10 shots at it. So you're taking a snapshot in time is sometimes interesting. How much it might not be scientifically conducive to anything, it's also very interesting to go, well, that could happen.
Yeah.
What if that's the best case? What if it's the worst case? Who knows? We can find that out later, but that's a nice pattern.
I think I've learned something from that. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I think I've learned something.
You going to blame the gun for some of the missing, perhaps?
I could do, yes.
You have to be a hell of a shot to hit birds with a pattern that small. That's something I do know.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh well. Conclusion?
Conclusion, well, I think there's a multitude of them. Using steel shot in a non-steel shot proofed gun, the gun hasn't blown up, the barrels aren't marked in the sense that they're not scored, but the chokes are slightly rivelled.
Indeed.
So it's not come out of it entirely unscathed. I think I'll leave other people to draw their conclusions from today's experimentation. I'm more intrigued now by some of the issues concerning the choke that I'd like to look at a bit more. You know, perhaps we'll revisit this at some point in the future, and kind of see where it takes us.
Quite possibly. Like we said earlier, we'll come back hopefully in a year's time after another season's worth of shooting and abuse.
Indeed.
And see how she stands. However, at that point we might have played with the choke a little bit.
Yeah.
Which will obviously ruin the test completely in one way.
From a scientific point of view, but if it...
unfortunately, this is not purely science. There's got to be some enjoyment had in actually shooting it as well.
Indeed, absolutely. Yes, and I'm trying not to have my judgment clouded too much by prejudice against steel shot. I've done pattern plate work in the past with lead cartridges, and like you say, you fire a dozen lead cartridges and you will get 1 or 2 out of that with abortionate patterns.
Yeah. Well, it's where it's very, very important to actually pattern test, and very important to pattern test to a gun. It's the difference I've always found between cheap and more expensive cartridges is just the consistency. It's the fact that you might only have 1 in 10 that throws a pattern that you just go, that's a bit odd, as opposed to 3 in 10.
Yes.
Not that really matters because I can't shoot anyway, but...
Yes, you and me both.
Guys, thank you very much for watching. Until next year, this gun's going to go back in your cabinet, and I hope you've enjoyed.